Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island, a rare sequel from an author not known for them, and in this case, to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, his most famous work. If you enjoy this sort of content, I hope you'll remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and leave a comment. It really helps us out. And don't forget to join us over on Twitch for our readings Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 6 p.m. Pacific. And now, on to the story. Chapter 5. So then, all was explained by the submarine explosion of this torpedo. Cyrus Harding could not be mistaken, as during the War of the Union he had had occasion to try these terrible engines of destruction. It was under the action of this cylinder, charged with some explosive substance, nitroglycerin, picrate, or some other material of the same nature, that the water of the channel had been raised like a dome, the bottom of the brig crushed in, and she had sunk instantly, the damage done to her hull being so considerable that it was impossible to refloat her. The Speedy had not been able to withstand a torpedo that would have destroyed an ironclad as easily as a fishing boat. Yes, all was explained. Everything, except the presence of the torpedo in the waters of the channel. "My friends, then," said Cyrus Harding, "we can no longer be in doubt as to the presence of a mysterious being, a castaway like us, perhaps, abandoned on our island. And I say this in order that Ayrton may be acquainted with all the strange events which have occurred during these 2 years. Who this beneficent stranger is, whose intervention has, so fortunately for us, been manifested on many occasions, I cannot imagine. What his object can be in acting thus, in concealing himself after rendering us so many services, I cannot understand. But his services are not the less real, and are of such a nature that only a man possessed of prodigious power could render them. Ayrton is indebted to him as much as we are, for if it was the stranger who saved me from the waves after the fall from the balloon, evidently it was he who wrote the document, who placed the bottle in the channel, and who has made known to us the situation of our companion. I will add that it was he who guided that chest, provided with everything we wanted, and stranded it on Flotsam Point. That it was he who lighted that fire on the heights of the island which permitted you to land, that it was he who fired that bullet found in the body of the peccary, that it was he who plunged that torpedo into the channel which destroyed the brig. In a word, that all those inexplicable events, for which we could not assign a reason, are due to this mysterious being. Therefore, whoever he may be, whether shipwrecked or exiled on our island, we shall be ungrateful if we think ourselves freed from gratitude towards him. We have contracted a debt, and I hope that we shall one day pay it." "You are right in speaking thus, my dear Cyrus," replied Gideon Spilett. "Yes, there is an almost all-powerful being hidden in some part of the island, and whose influence has been singularly useful to our colony. I will add that the unknown appears to possess means of action which border on the supernatural. If in the events of practical life the supernatural were recognizable, is it he who is in secret communication with us by the well in Granite House? And has he thus a knowledge of all our plans? Was it he who threw us that bottle when the vessel made her first cruise? Was it he who threw Top out of the lake and killed the dugong? Was it he who, as everything leads us to believe, saved you from the waves, and that under circumstances in which anyone else would not have been able to act? If it was he possesses a power which renders his master of the elements. If it was he possesses a power which renders him master of the elements." The reporter's reasoning was just, and everyone felt it to be so. "Yes," rejoined Cyrus Harding, "if the intervention of a human being is not more questionable for us, I agree that he has at his disposal means of action beyond those possessed by humanity. There is a mystery still, but if we discover the man, the mystery will be discovered also. The question then is, ought we to respect the incognito of this generous being, or ought we to do everything to find him out? What is your opinion on the matter?" "My opinion," said Pencroft, "is that whomever he may be, he is a brave man, and he has my esteem." Be it so, answered Harding. But that is not an answer, Pencroft. Master, then said Neb, my idea is that we may search as long as we like for this gentleman whom you are talking about, but that we shall not discover him till he pleases. That's not bad. What you say, Neb? Observed Pencroft. I am of Neb's opinion, said Gideon Spilett, but that is no reason for not attempting the adventure. Whether we find this mysterious being or not, we shall at least have fulfilled our duty towards him. And you, my boy, give us your opinion, said the engineer, turning to Herbert. Oh, how I should like to thank him, he who saved you first, and who has now saved us, cried Herbert, his countenance full of animation. Of course, my boy, replied Pencroft, so would I, and all of us. I'm not inquisitive, but I would give one of my eyes to see this individual face to face. It seems to me that he must be handsome, tall, strong, with a splendid beard, radiant hair, and that he must be seated on clouds, a great ball in his hands. But Pencroft, answered Spilett, you're describing a picture of the Creator. Possibly, Mr. Spilett, replied the sailor, but that is how I imagine him. And you, Ayrton? asked the engineer. Captain Harding, replied Ayrton, I can give you no better advice in this matter. Whatever you do will be best. When you wish me to join you in your researches, I am ready to follow you. I thank you, Ayrton, answered Cyrus Harding, but I should like a more direct answer to the question I put to you. You are our companion. You have already endangered your life several times for us, and you, as well as the rest, ought to be consulted in the matter of any important decision. Speak, therefore. Captain Harding, replied Ayrton, I think that we ought to do everything to discover this unknown benefactor. Perhaps he is alone. Perhaps he is suffering. Perhaps he has a life to be renewed. I, too, as you said, have a debt of gratitude to pay him. It was he, it could be only he, who must have come to Tabor Island, who found there the wretch you knew, and who made known to you that there was an unfortunate man there to be saved. Therefore it is thanks to him that I have become a man again. No, I will never forget him. That is settled then, said Cyrus Harding. We will begin our researches as soon as possible. We will not leave a corner of the island unexplored. We will search into its most secret recesses, and will hope that our unknown friend will pardon us in consideration of our intentions. For several days the colonists were actively employed in haymaking and the harvest. Before putting their project of exploring the yet unknown parts of the island into execution, they wished to get all possible work finished. It was also the time for collecting the various vegetables from the Tabor Island plants. All was stowed away, and happily there was no want of room in Granite House, in which they might have housed all the treasures of the island. The products of the colony were there, methodically arranged and in a safe place, as may be believed, sheltered as much from animals as from man. There was no fear of damp in the middle of that thick mass of granite. Many natural excavations situated in the upper passage were enlarged either by pickaxe or mine, and Granite House thus became a general warehouse, containing all the provisions, arms, tools, and spare utensils, in a word, all the stores of the colony. As to the guns obtained from the brig, they were pretty pieces of ordnance, which at Pencroft's entreaty were hoisted by means of tackle and pulleys right up into Granite House. Embrasures were made between the windows, and the shining muzzles of the guns could soon be seen through the granite cliff. From this height they commanded all Union Bay. It was like a little Gibraltar, and any vessel anchored off the islet would inevitably be exposed to the fire of this aerial battery. "Captain," said Pencroft one day, it was the 8th of November, "now that our fortifications are finished, it would be a good thing if we tried the range of our guns." "Do you think that is useful?" asked the engineer. "It is more than useful. It is necessary. Without that, how are we to know to what distance we can send one of those pretty shot with which we are provided?" "Try them, Pencroft," replied the engineer. "However, I think that in making the experiment we ought to employ not the ordinary powder, the supply of which I think should remain untouched, but the pyroxyle, which will never fail us." "Can the cannon support the shock of the pyroxyle?" asked the reporter, who was not less anxious than Pencroft to try the artillery of Granite House. "I believe so. However," added the engineer, "we will be prudent." The engineer was right in thinking that the guns were of excellent make. Made of forged steel and breech-loaders, they ought consequently to be able to bear a considerable charge, and also have an enormous range. In fact, as regards practical effect, the transit described by the ball ought to be as extended as possible, and this tension could only be obtained under the condition that the projectile should be impelled with a great initial velocity. "Now," said Harding to his companions, "the initial velocity is in proportion to the quantity of powder used. In the fabrication of these pieces, everything depends on employing a metal with the highest possible power of resistance, and steel is incontestably that metal of all others which resists the best. I have therefore reason to believe that our guns will bear without risk the expansion of the pyroxyle gas, and will give excellent results." "We should be a great deal more certain of that when we've tried them," answered Pencroft. It is unnecessary to say that the 4 cannons were in perfect order. Since they had been taken from the water, the sailor had bestowed great care upon them. How many hours he had spent in rubbing, greasing, and polishing them, and in cleaning the mechanism. And now the pieces were as brilliant as if they had been on board a frigate of the United States Navy. On this day, therefore, in presence of all the members of the colony, including Master Jup and Top, the 4 cannon were successively tried. They were charged with pyroxyle, taking into consideration its explosive power, which, as has been said, is 4 times that of ordinary powder. The projectile to be fired was cylindroconic. Pencroft, holding the end of the quick match, stood ready to fire. At Harding's signal, he fired. The shot, passing over the islet, fell into the sea at a distance which could not be calculated with exactitude. The second gun was pointed at the rocks at the end of Flotsam Point, and the shot, striking a sharp rock nearly 3 miles from Granite House, made it fly into splinters. It was Herbert who had pointed this gun and fired it, and very proud he was of his first shot. Pencroft only was prouder than he. Such a shot, the honor of which belonged to his dear boy. The third shot, aimed this time at the downs forming the upper side of Union Bay, struck the sand at a distance of 4 miles, then, having ricocheted, was lost in the sea in a cloud of spray. For the 4th piece, Cyrus Harding slightly increased the charge, so as to try its extreme range. Then, all standing aside for fear of its bursting, the match was lighted by means of a long cord. A tremendous report was heard, but the piece had held good, and the colonists, rushing to the windows, saw the shot graze the rocks of Mandible Cape nearly 5 miles from Granite House, and disappear in Shark Gulf. "Well, Captain," exclaimed Pencroft, whose cheers might have rivaled the reports themselves, "what do you say of our battery? All the pirates of the Pacific have only to present themselves before Granite House. Not one can land there now without our permission." "Believe me, Pencroft," replied the engineer, "it would be better not to have to make the experiment." "Well," said the sailor, "what ought to be done with regard to those 6 villains who are roaming about the island? Are we to leave them to overrun our forests, our fields, our plantations? These pirates are regular jaguars, and it seems to me we ought not to hesitate to treat them as such. What do you think, Ayrton?" added Pencroft, turning to his companion. Ayrton hesitated at first to reply, and Cyrus Harding regretted that Pencroft had so thoughtlessly put this question, and he was much moved when Ayrton replied in a humble tone, "I have been one of those jaguars, Mr. Pencroft. I have no right to speak." And with a slow step he walked away. Pencroft understood. "What a brute I am," he exclaimed. "Poor Ayrton. He has as much right to speak here as anyone." "Yes," said Gideon Spilett, "but his reserve does him honor, and it is right to respect the feeling which he has about his sad past." "Certainly, Mr. Spilett," answered the sailor, "and there is no fear of my doing so again. I would rather bite my tongue off than cause Ayrton any pain. But to return to the question, it seems to me that these ruffians have no right to any pity, and that we ought to rid the island of them as soon as possible." "Is that your opinion, Pencroft?" asked the engineer. "Quite my opinion." "And before hunting them mercilessly, you would not wait until they had committed some fresh act of hostility against us?" "Isn't that what they've done already?" asked Pencroft, who did not understand these scruples. "They may adopt other sentiments," said Harding, "and perhaps repent." "They repent!" exclaimed the sailor, shrugging his shoulders. "Pencroft, think of Ayrton," said Herbert, taking the sailor's hand. "He became an honest man again." Pencroft looked at his companions one after the other. He had never thought of his proposal being met with any objection. His rough nature could not allow that they ought to come to terms with the rascals who had landed on the island with Bob Harvey's accomplices, the murderers of the crew of the Speedy, and he looked upon them as wild beasts which ought to be destroyed without delay and without remorse. "Come," said he, "everybody's against me. You wish to be generous to those villains? Very well. I hope we mayn't repent it." "What danger shall we run," said Herbert, "if we take care to be always on our guard?" Observed the reporter, who had not given any decided opinion. "They are 6 and well armed. If they each lay hid in a corner, and each fired at one of us, they would soon be masters of the colony." "Why have they not done so?" said Herbert. "No doubt because it was not their interest to do it. Besides, we are 6 also." "Well, well," replied Pencroft, whom no reasoning could have convinced. "Let us leave these good people to do what they like, and don't think anything more about them." "Come, Pencroft," said Neb, "don't make yourself out so bad as all that. Suppose one of these unfortunate men were before you here, within good range of your guns. You would not fire." "I would fire on him as I would on a mad dog, Neb," replied Pencroft coldly. "Pencroft," said the engineer, "you have always shown much deference to my advice. Will you in this matter yield to me?" "I will do as you please, Captain Harding," answered the sailor, who was not at all convinced. "Very well. Wait, and we will not attack them unless we are attacked first." Thus their behavior towards the pirates was agreed upon, although Pencroft augured nothing good from it. They were not to attack them, but were to be on their guard. After all, the island was large and fertile. If any sentiment of honesty yet remained in the bottom of their hearts, these wretches might, perhaps, be reclaimed. Was it not their interest in the situation in which they found themselves to begin a new life? At any rate, for humanity's sake alone, it would be right to wait. The colonists would no longer, as before, be able to go and come without fear. Hitherto, they had only wild beasts to guard against, and now 6 convicts of the worst description, perhaps, were roaming over their island. It was serious, certainly, and to less brave men it would have been security lost. No matter. At present the colonists had reason on their side against Pencroft. Would they be right in the future? That remained to be seen. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. However, the chief business of the colonists was to make that complete exploration of the island which had been decided upon, and which would have 2 objects: to discover the mysterious being whose existence was now indisputable, and at the same time to find out what had become of the pirates, what retreat they had chosen, what sort of life they were leading, and what was to be feared from them. Cyrus Harding wished to set out without delay, but as the expedition would be of some days' duration, it appeared best to load the cart with different materials and tools in order to facilitate the organization of the encampments. One of the onagers, however, having hurt its leg, could not be harnessed at present, and a few days' rest was necessary. The departure was therefore put off for a week, until the 20th of November. The month of November in this latitude corresponds to the month of May in the northern zones. It was therefore the fine season. The sun was entering the Tropic of Capricorn and gave the longest days in the year. The time was, therefore, very favorable for the projected expedition, which, if it did not accomplish its principal object, would at any rate be fruitful in discoveries, especially of natural productions, since Harding proposed to explore those dense forests of the far west, which stretched to the extremity of the Serpentine Peninsula. During the 9 days which preceded their departure, it was agreed that the work on Prospect Heights should be finished off. Moreover, it was necessary for Ayrton to return to the corral, where the domesticated animals required his care. It was decided that he should spend 2 days there, and return to Granite House after having liberally supplied the stables. As he was about to start, Harding asked him if he would not like one of them to accompany him, observing that the island was less safe than formerly. Ayrton replied that this was unnecessary, as he was enough for the work, and that besides he apprehended no danger. If anything occurred at the corral or in the neighborhood, he could instantly warn the colonists by sending a telegram to Granite House. Ayrton departed at dawn on the 9th, taking the cart drawn by one onager, and 2 hours after, the electric wire announced that he had found all in order at the corral. During these 2 days, Harding busied himself in executing a project which would be completely guarding Granite House against any surprise. It was necessary to completely conceal the opening of the old outlet, which was already walled up and partly hidden under grass and plants at the southern angle of Lake Grant. Nothing was easier, since if the level of the lake was raised 2 or 3 feet, the opening would be quite beneath it. Now, to raise this level, they had only to establish a dam at the 2 openings made by the lake, and by which were fed Creek Glycerin and Falls River. The colonists worked with a will, and the 2 dams, which besides did not exceed 8 feet in width by 3 in height, were rapidly erected by means of well-cemented blocks of stone. This work finished, it would have been impossible to guess that at the part of the lake there existed a subterranean passage through which the overflow of the lake formerly escaped. Of course, the little stream which fed the reservoir of Granite House and worked the lift had been carefully preserved, and the water could not fail. The lift once raised, this sure and comfortable retreat would be safe from any surprise. This work had been so quickly done that Pencroft, Gideon Spilett, and Herbert found time to make an expedition to Port Balloon. The sailor was very anxious to know if the little creek in which the Bonadventure was moored had been visited by the convicts. These gentlemen, he observed, landed on the south coast, and if they followed the shore, it is to be feared that they may have discovered the little harbor, and in that case I wouldn't give $50 for our Bonadventure. Pencroft's apprehensions were not without foundation, and a visit to Port Balloon appeared to be very desirable. The sailor and his companions set off on the 10th of November, after dinner, well armed, Pencroft, ostentatiously slipping 2 bullets into each barrel of his rifle, shook his head in a way which betokened nothing good to anyone who approached too near him, whether man or beast, as he said. Gideon Spilett and Herbert also took their guns, and about 3 o'clock all 3 left Granite House. Neb accompanied them to the turn of the Mercy, and after they had crossed, he raised the bridge. It was agreed that a gunshot should announce the colonists' return, and that at the signal Neb should return and re-establish the communication between the 2 banks of the river. The little band advanced directly along the road which led to the southern coast of the island. This was only a distance of 3.5 miles, but Gideon Spilett and his companions took 2 hours to traverse it. They examined all the border of the road, the thick forest, as well as Tabor Marsh. They found no trace of the fugitives, who, no doubt, not having yet discovered the number of the colonists, or the means of defense which they had at their disposal, had gained the less accessible parts of the island. Arrived at Port Balloon, Pencroft saw with extreme satisfaction that the Bonadventure was tranquilly floating in the narrow creek. However, Port Balloon was so well hidden among high rocks that it could scarcely be discovered either from the land or the sea. "Come," said Pencroft. "The blackguards have not been there yet. Long grass suits reptiles best, and evidently we shall find them in the far west." "And it's very lucky, for they have found the Bonadventure," added Herbert. "They would have gone off in her, and we should have been prevented from returning to Tabor Island." "Indeed," remarked the reporter. "It will be important to take a document there which will make known the situation of Lincoln Island and Ayrton's new residence, in case the Scotch yacht returns to fetch him." "Well, the Bonadventure is always there, Mr. Spilett," answered the sailor. "She and her crew are ready to start at a moment's notice." "I think, Pencroft, that is the thing to be done after our exploration of the island is finished. It is possible, after all, that the stranger, if we manage to find him, may know as much about Tabor Island as about Lincoln Island. Do not forget that he is certainly the author of the document, and he may, perhaps, know how far we may count on the return of the yacht." "But," exclaimed Pencroft, "who in the world can he be? The fellow knows us, and we know nothing about him. If he is a simple castaway, why should he conceal himself? We are honest men, I suppose, and the society of honest men isn't unpleasant to anyone. Did he come here voluntarily? Can he leave the island if he likes? Is he still here? Will he remain any longer?" Chatting thus, Pencroft, Gideon Spilett, and Herbert got on board and looked about the deck of the Bonadventure. All at once, the sailor having examined the bits to which the cable of the anchor was secured. "Hello," he cried. "This is queer." "What is the matter, Pencroft?" asked the reporter. "The matter is that it was not I who made this knot." And Pencroft showed a rope which fastened the cable to the bit itself. "What? It was not you?" asked Gideon Spilett. "No, I can swear to it. This is a reef knot, and I always make a running bowline." "You must be mistaken, Pencroft." "I am not mistaken," declared the sailor. "My hand does it so naturally, and one's hand is never mistaken." "Then can the convicts have been on board?" asked Herbert. "I know nothing about that," answered Pencroft. "But what is certain is that someone has weighed the Bonadventure's anchor and dropped it again. And look here. Here's another proof. The cable of the anchor has been run out, and its service is no longer at the hawse hole. I repeat that someone has been using our vessel." "But if the convicts had used her, they would have pillaged her, or rather gone off with her." "Gone off? Where to? To Tabor Island?" replied Pencroft. "Do you think they would risk themselves in a boat of such small tonnage?" "We must, besides, be sure that they know of the islet," rejoined the reporter. "However that may be," said the sailor, "as sure as my name is Bonadventure Pencroft of the Vineyard, our Bonadventure has sailed without us." The sailor was positive that neither Gideon Spilett nor Herbert could dispute his statement. It was evident that the vessel had been moved, more or less, since Pencroft had brought her to Port Balloon. As to the sailor, he had not the slightest doubt that the anchor had been raised and then dropped again. Now, what was the use of these two maneuvers, unless the vessel had been employed in some expedition? "But how was it we did not see the Bonadventure pass in the sight of the island?" observed the reporter, who was anxious to bring forward every possible objection. "Why, Mr. Spilett," replied the sailor, "they would only have to start in the night with a good breeze, and they would be out of sight of the island in 2 hours." "Well," resumed Gideon Spilett, "I ask again, what object could the convicts have had in using the Bonadventure, and why, after they had made use of her, should they have brought her back to port?" "Why, Mr. Spilett," replied the sailor, "we must put that among the unaccountable things, and not think anything more about it. The chief thing is that the Bonadventure was there, and she is there now. Only unfortunately, if the convicts take her a second time, we shall very likely not find her again in her place." "Then, Pencroft," said Herbert, "would it not be wisest to bring the Bonadventure off to Granite House?" Yes and no, answered Pencroft. Or rather, no. The mouth of the Mersey is a bad place for a vessel, and the sea is heavy there. But by pulling her up on the sand, to the foot of the chimneys? Perhaps, yes, replied Pencroft. At any rate, since we must leave Granite House for a long expedition, I think the Bonadventure will be safer here during our absence, and we shall do best to leave her here until the island is rid of these blackguards. That is exactly my opinion, said the reporter. At any rate, in the event of bad weather, she will not be exposed here as she would be at the mouth of the Mersey. But suppose the convicts pay her another visit, said Herbert. Well, my boy, replied Pencroft, not finding her here, they would not be long in finding her on the sands of Granite House, and during our absence nothing could hinder them from seizing her. I agree, therefore, with Mr. Spilett that she must be left in Port Balloon, but if on our return we have not rid the island of those rascals, it will be prudent to bring our boat to Granite House, until the time when we need not fear any unpleasant visits. That's settled. Let us be off, said the reporter. Pencroft, Herbert, and Gideon Spilett, on their return to Granite House, told the engineer all that had passed, and the latter approved of their arrangements both for the present and the future. He also promised the sailor that he would study the part of the channel situated between the islet and the coast, so as to ascertain if it would not be possible to make an artificial harbor there by means of dams. In this way the Bonadventure would be always within reach, under the eyes of the colonists, and, if necessary, under lock and key. That evening a telegram was sent to Ayrton requesting him to bring from the corral a couple of goats, which Neb wished to acclimatize to the plateau. Singularly enough, Ayrton did not acknowledge the receipt of the dispatch, as he was accustomed to do. This could not but astonish the engineer. But it might be that Ayrton was not at that moment in the corral, or even that he was on his way back to Granite House. In fact, 2 days had already passed since his departure, and it had been decided that on the evening of the 10th, or at the latest the morning of the 11th, he should return. The colonists waited, therefore, for Ayrton to appear on Prospect Heights. Neb and Herbert even watched at the bridge so as to be ready to lower it the moment their companion presented himself. But up to 10 in the evening there were no signs of Ayrton. It was therefore judged best to send a fresh dispatch requiring an immediate reply. The bell of the telegraph at Granite House remained mute. The colonists' uneasiness was great. What had happened? Was Ayrton no longer at the corral, or if he was still there, had he no longer control over his movements? Could they go to the corral in this dark night? They consulted. Some wished to go, the others to remain. But, said Herbert, perhaps some accident has happened to the telegraphic apparatus, so that it works no longer. That may be, said the reporter. Wait till tomorrow, replied Cyrus Harding. It is possible, indeed, that Ayrton has not received our dispatch, or even that we have not received his. They waited, of course not without some anxiety. At dawn of day, the 11th of November, Harding again sent the electric current along the wire and received no reply. He tried again, the same result. Off to the corral, said he. And well armed, added Pencroft. It was immediately decided that Granite House should not be left alone, and that Neb should remain there. After having accompanied his friends to Creek Glycerine, he raised the bridge, and waiting behind a tree, he watched for the return of either his companions or Ayrton. In the event of the pirates presenting themselves and attempting to force the passage, he was to endeavor to stop them by firing on them, and as a last resource, he was to take refuge in Granite House, where, the lift once raised, he would be in safety. Cyrus Harding, Gideon Spilett, Herbert, and Pencroft were to repair to the corral, and if they did not find Ayrton, search the neighboring woods. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the engineer and his 3 companions had passed Creek Glycerine, and Neb posted himself behind a small mound crowned by several dragon trees on the left bank of the stream. The colonists, after leaving the plateau of Prospect Heights, immediately took the road to the corral. They shouldered their guns, ready to fire on the slightest hostile demonstration. The 2 rifles and the 2 guns had been loaded with ball. The wood was thick on each side of the road and might easily have concealed the convicts, who, owing to their weapons, would have been really formidable. The colonists walked rapidly and in silence. Top preceded them, sometimes running on the road, sometimes taking a ramble into the wood, but always quiet and not appearing to fear anything unusual. And they could be sure that the faithful dog would not allow them to be surprised, but would bark at the least appearance of danger. Cyrus Harding and his companions followed behind the road the wire which connected the corral with Granite House. After walking for nearly 2 miles, they had not as yet discovered any explanation of the difficulty. The posts were in good order, the wire regularly extended. However, at that moment the engineer observed that the wire appeared to be slack, and on arriving at post number 74, Herbert, who was in advance, stopped, exclaiming, "The wire is broken." His companions hurried forward and arrived at the spot where the lad was standing. The post was rooted up and lying across the path. The unexpected explanation of the difficulty was here, and it was evident that the dispatches from Granite House had not been received at the corral, nor those from the corral at Granite House. "It wasn't the wind that blew down this post," observed Pencroft. "No," replied Gideon Spilett. "The earth has been dug up round its foot, and has been torn up by the hand of man." "Besides, the wire is broken," added Herbert, showing that the wire had been snapped. "Is the fracture recent?" asked Harding. "Yes," answered Herbert. "It has certainly been done quite lately." "To the corral! To the corral!" exclaimed the sailor. The colonists were now halfway between Granite House and the corral, having still 2.5 miles to go. They pressed forward with redoubled speed. Indeed, it was to be feared that some serious accident had occurred in the corral. No doubt Ayrton might have sent a telegram which had not arrived, but this was not the reason why his companions were so uneasy. For a more unaccountable circumstance, Ayrton, who had promised to return the evening before, had not reappeared. In short, it was not without a motive that all communication had been stopped between the corral and Granite House, and who but the convicts could have any interest in interrupting this communication? The settlers hastened on, their hearts oppressed with anxiety. They were sincerely attached to their new companion. Were they to find him struck down by the hands of those whom he was formerly the leader? Soon they arrived at the place where the road led along the side of the little stream which flowed from the Red Creek and watered the meadows of the corral. They then moderated their pace so that they should not be out of breath at the moment when a struggle might be necessary. Their guns were in their hands, ready cocked. The forest was watched on every side. Top uttered sullen groans, which were rather ominous. At last the palisade appeared through the trees. No trace of any damage could be seen. The gate was shut as usual. Deep silence reigned in the corral, and neither the accustomed bleating of the sheep nor Ayrton's voice could be heard. "Let us enter," said Cyrus Harding. And the engineer advanced while his companions, keeping watch about 20 paces behind him, were ready to fire at a moment's notice. Harding raised the inner latch of the gate and was about to push it back when Top barked loudly. A report sounded and was responded to by a cry of pain. Herbert, struck by a bullet, lay stretched on the ground. End of chapter 6. Well, they're still alive. Let's see what happens next, shall we? If you've enjoyed this sort of content, I hope you'll remember to hit the like and subscribe, smash that bell icon, and leave a comment. It really helps us out. Good night now.